Welcome. It's been a while since we have had an episode of Sequoia Fund Live. I'm really excited to have Dr. Percap, Shawn Spruce, back with me this evening. And we're going to be talking about something that we talked about just over a year ago. There have been some amazing developments in this, and he's done his homework, as is tradition. Dr. Percap has put together a lot of information for us on this. This was something that we started talking about a year ago because it just seemed very interesting. It was very new. And we thought, what could possibly go wrong with this? And we've seen some ups and downs with this, and some amazing developments in collegiate sports. So we're going to be talking about the NIL Rule, name, image, and likeness, and how this has affected college sports and maybe even some businesses. Dr. Percap, welcome. How are you this evening?
Russ, I'm doing fantastic. And you're right. It was about a year ago. It was last July when they announced that college athletes would be able to profit from, I like the way you use the term NIL, because it's kind of like, yeah, is it nothing? Is it more? Usually you hear it referred to as NIL, but I like NIL, name, image, likeness. And it was about a year ago in July. And we did one of these broadcasts to kind of get the feel of what that was going to mean for college sports, for small businesses, for fans, for universities. And it happened. It went live last fall when football started, and it continued into basketball season. And it just completely upended the world of college sports as we know it. It's everything has changed, and we're not going back. The cat is out of the bag. For years and years, people criticized the college sports system, coaches with these 8-figure salaries, training facilities and locker rooms that would rival a 5-star resort. And everybody was getting paid, and some people were getting paid a lot of money, except the athletes that were out there on the court or on the field. And depending on which side of the fence you're on, some people say, hey, look, they get a college education, they get a scholarship, they're there to learn first and foremost. Other people are like, yeah, but come on, there's a lot of money at stake here. Some of these kids, this is the only chance they're ever going to have to play. They're not going to make it to the pros. They're part of these multi-million-dollar athletic programs. They're in revenue-earning sports that generate a profit for these universities. Other people can benefit. Other students can profit. Other students can get a job with a work-study program or get a job at a library. But these athletes know they were banned from that, could not make a profit doing anything related to their sport. And the amount of time that a lot of these athletes put into their programs, this idea of the student athlete, right? And I think in a lot of cases, we really need to flip that over and just call it what it is. They're athlete students. Many of these athletes that do 40-hour weeks and appearances, and some of them have been very critical that, look, they can't study. They can't devote the time and energy to classes like people would like to think they can. And so it just completely changed everything. But now here we are a year into it. And let's kind of analyze what's happened, where we're at now, what kind of has occurred over the last year, and what we can expect going forward. I think it's going to be really interesting as we move along into this next season, this next school year, a full year of NIL under our belts, and just everything that's happened. It's just completely exploded. Again, I can't understate how big an impact it's had.
Yeah, this is amazing. And I love how you phrased that they're not student athletes, they're athlete students. And let's face it, for a lot of these kids, I say kids, a little gray in the beard, would they be at college were it not for sports? Or would they have taken a different path? We've said for years that collegiate sports, in a lot of cases, really is the minor leagues for whatever sport these folks are playing. If they're playing water polo, unless you're going to the Olympics, water polo may be, you may peak out at college. That's the last you're going to play at a competitive level with something like that. But when you talk about these mega programs, I think Lou Holtz, back when he was coaching at Notre Dame, he always said that he never really looked at it as just coaching a sport. He said, I'm running a $200 million corporation here. He had 200 people working under him. Some of those were the athletes themselves. And he really saw it as this big machine. And so, yeah, why shouldn't these athletes get a little bit of the benefit from that? You want to, maybe we should just jump into the slides here and see what you got for us?
Yeah, let's take a look at some of our visuals. And so you've got the main revenue earning sports. You've got football, you've got men's and women's basketball, and then
hang on a second, Shawn. Let me try something here. I just want to see if if I can do something.
Okay.
Picture in picture. I'm trying something new. I'm gonna try a little tech stuff here and see if this will work. And obviously nothing I'm doing is working, except I'm just interrupting you. So my apologies. I was trying to make this a little easier for folks to see, but I'll let you continue. My apologies.
Okay, no worries. So you've got the main revenue earning sports at most of these universities. You've got football, if they have a football team. You've got men's and women's basketball, and then in some schools you've got ice hockey, and everything else, like you mentioned, Russ, the water polo, the gymnastics, baseball, even track and field, wrestling, fencing. Great athletes, great sports. They pour their heart and souls into those sports, but unfortunately, people aren't packing stadiums to watch sports like that, so they're not generating a profit. But it's interesting. Many of those athletes and those sports are being upended just as much as these big revenue earning sports as well. And just the ripple effects of NIL are just completely traveled across the whole spectrum of college sports, both men and women's sports. And it's not always these big name athletes that you would think of are the superstar players. Some of it has to do with just some of the social media followings that they have. There have been some really, really high profile female gymnasts, volleyball players, track and field athletes, even the athletes that are in non-revenue sports, such as those that have done really well on NIL just because they have huge social media followings. And there's a direct correlation between an athlete's social media following and their ability to perform in their given sport. And it's not enough to be a great athlete. An athlete has to have that social media following, and specifically Instagram is really kind of the gauge that they're using to determine how marketable these athletes are and what their earning potential is through NIL. And again, some of these athletes aren't necessarily the superstar athletes that we think of, the star quarterback for Alabama or somebody like that. It's some of these lower profile sports that have the athletes that have a very significant following for whatever reason. Let's take a look at the next slide, Russ.
I think we've had some pretty significant action in things like women's volleyball and, like I said, gymnastics. That was what was amazing to me. We all think it's going to be the star basketball player, the quarterback, or whatever on the football team. And it turns out that some of these, I guess I won't say lesser known sports, because maybe not the economic driver sports, for lack of a better term. These are the folks who are almost working full time in their social media too. It's incredible to see the following. Some of these people have got hundreds of thousands of followers on their social media. That takes a lot of work.
They do. You're right. It takes a lot of work. Yeah. And, kind of the sweet spot, again, Instagram is one of the main social media platforms that they use to monetize NIL athletes. And 50,000 followers is kind of that benchmark number. Once an athlete has that 50,000 person following on Instagram, at that point, they can really start making some money. Not huge money, and again, it can be just as simple as going to a restaurant and getting a free meal and then posting about it. But at 50,000 followers, if you play that right, you can turn that into about $40,000 worth of NIL income annual payday. Again, it's not the big money that some of the NIL athletes are making, but it's for somebody in school making a few posts. But again, they've got to work on it. They've got to keep those posts coming. They've got to maintain that presence. And anybody that uses social media knows how much work it is. And it's a real art, knowing how to make the right posts and get the right pictures on there. And of course, they have to edit those pictures sometimes and crop them. And so, there's definitely some energy that goes into it and some expertise. But 50,000 followers on Instagram, that's kind of that base level to where it starts becoming really relevant. Let's take a look at another one of these slides. Russ, I've always got to include these winners and losers, right? And all these presentations that we do. So let's talk a little bit more about the winners and losers in the world of NIL college sports. So if you look there on the top right-hand corner, you've got Friends of Smokey and Heels for Life. Now, these two organizations are what we call college sports collectives, and they have become this huge catalyst for NIL money and also just assisting athletes with brokering these NIL deals. And what these are organizations that operate independently from these specific universities, but they have the backing of boosters and other businesses, and they pump money into these programs specifically designed to create NIL opportunities for athletes and help them, again, kind of navigate this whole new world of NIL. And it's just overnight, they have become these huge forces in these big revenue-earning college sports programs. It's gotten to the point you can't really function as a competitive Division I or even a lower division tier team if you don't have a strong NIL, because that's what's going to create these NIL opportunities, this money. These colleges, they can't put money in an athlete's pocket directly, but they can work through these NILs and create these opportunities. And all the major universities, all the big teams are scrambling to get these these collectives in place. And most of them already have them very well established, and they're generating lots of money, creating these opportunities, connecting these athletes with local businesses. And it's a gray area. It's completely unregulated. And a lot of how these schools and these collectives and how these athletes are operating are based on state laws, which can be all the way across the board, depending on what state an athlete is. It's really kind of the Wild West era. And there's a lot of criticism being directed at how it's being managed. And really, the NCAA wasn't really prepared for how, I don't think they recognized just what it would be when the floodgates were opened and how many different people would become involved and how quickly it would kind of explode. And the NCAA, you can think of them as really a loser because they're losing control of college sports. They're losing control of the establishment and the way college sports have always been managed. And this idea that college athletes can't be compensated. They're losing influence to these collectives and some of these other entities that are stepping in. You have to think of also the fans. Are they winners or losers? I'm not really sure where they're at this point. Some people think, these NILs can come in and they can be game changers. If a school can get a big collective together and they can get a lot of money to get the best athletes and compensate them in some way, shape, or form, that it's going to make their team better. And some of these older schools that have kind of fallen from grace in recent years, some of these old football schools that used to be big perennial winners from year in, year out, have kind of fallen from that pedestal. People are hoping, we can bring our school back through these collectives and through these NIL deals, and we can kind of buy our way into success again. And if you're a fan from one of those schools, you might be excited thinking, hey, this could be our chance to return to those glory years. Or you might just be kind of turned off and say, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I wanted to see amateur athletes. I want to see my team compete on the field based on, kind of an old school system of going out and recruiting kids and bringing them in and training them and having a good coach. And it's a different sports landscape, and the team that you rooted for all these years, they're structured very differently now. The athletes are incentivized in a very different way. And for some people, they might like it. Some fans might think it's a turnoff. You also have to look at the universities themselves. In this case, we have a picture there of the UNC Chapel Hill logo. I'm sorry, Russ, go ahead.
No, I was just, and I know you.
Do you have a question, Russ?
You've got a lot of information. I don't want to jump ahead, but it kind of makes me think: did anybody think about the potential for exploitation of these athletes? I know that a lot of people for years have thought
I
the
don't think they've
athletes were being exploited already.
I
You know,
think the
we're
thought's
running a
always been there. They
multi-million
just
dollar
haven't.
business
They
here with all these athletes as the center stage, and yeah, we're probably exploiting them in this way, but it seems like if it's unregulated, there is a lot of opportunity for exploitation.
Yeah, there definitely is, and I just think they had to rush this through. They didn't want to have to push this. It's all stemmed from a lawsuit in California that was really going to just make it was the NCAA was in a really tough spot and they couldn't fight it. And they knew there was a lawsuit in California and a couple of other states as well. And they knew that this NIL was coming. So they had to allow it. But yeah, they didn't spend a lot of time planning it. I think in the back of their minds, they thought they could keep it at bay for as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't. So rather than really create a systemized method for how to do this in a semi-fair and managed format, they just didn't have the time or the wherewithal to do that. So now you've got this situation where it's kind of a free-for-all. And yeah, certainly there are some athletes that are being exploited, being taken advantage of. You have universities that have lost some of their pull in terms of how these programs are managed. And again, these athletes, some of them are gaining more and more power. And you've almost created like kind of in some ways, a minor league professional program for some of the, especially football, right? There's never been a minor league for football. College has always served as that minor league. And now you have some athletes that are, they have more control over that. And they're able to, some of them are staying in the game longer. Traditionally you had a lot of these kids, if they were really good in college, they'd go pro within a couple of years. And now some athletes, they might be choosing to stay in college longer because they can make money off NIL, which in some ways could be a good thing. In other ways, maybe not. It's all going to kind of depend. But one interesting piece that's really, really fascinating is you've had this whole industry of businesses and services that have sprung up within the last year, all geared around NIL. And Open Doors is one of these companies. They provide all this information on NIL athletes, on schools and collectives, and they're kind of the go-to. If you want to look at what an athlete is worth in terms of their NIL earning potential, you can go to the Open Doors website and you can look up that athlete, you can see where they are, what school they go to, what kind of following they have on social media, what their potential earnings could be on NIL. This is a business, and they also help athletes build their brands and connect them with NIL deals. There's another web-based company called Influencer, and they're doing something very similar, supporting NIL athletes and providing opportunities for NIL programs. And it's some of these businesses are making a lot of money. They kind of fall into that realm of financial technology, fintech. And these are businesses and ideas that didn't even exist a year ago. And now you've got people just making a lot of money, not even athletes, not directly associated with colleges, not even part of these collectives. These are just entrepreneurs that see an opportunity to make a lot of money through this new landscape of college sports. So, Russ, I think my claim to fame here is this is the one time I wasn't able to figure out how to get Elon Musk into the winners and losers slide of one of these presentations, because he's always figuring out a way to get involved with this stuff. But I could not find a connection between so
there's a first time for everything, Shawn. I mean, my goodness, we'll cut you some slack for not including Elon Musk in this. I did notice that today an article came out that U.S. Bank and Open Doors have struck a deal. They're going to be providing some financial literacy education for these athletes, which is great. I see some good things coming from that. And then it makes me wonder, why aren't the schools doing this? Why aren't the schools themselves taking the lead on financial literacy education for these students?
And it's a really good point. And this is an opportunity also for a lot of these kids to get a little head start on their finances, right? And again, I'm going to show a slide here in a minute, but most college athletes, they're not going to make a ton of money off NIL. The six-figure big NIL payments, those are a very, very select group of athletes. Most of these athletes are going to probably, in the long run, not make that much more than just somebody who has a part-time job while they're going to school. But they're going to be able to do it through their profile as a college athlete. and possibly it's going to require less work and less time enabled in order to do that. But yeah, this is for a lot of these people. They're never going to go pro. They're not going to make a ton of money, but they are going to make enough money that they could really get a head start on their finances. And most of these college athletes, they don't have time for part-time jobs and things like that. So it could be a really good opportunity. And absolutely, financial education, financial literacy, it's a good teachable moment by all means. Let's look at another one of these slides. And this next one, and I think I shared this one earlier, but this shows where the big money is in college sports. And again, these revenue sports, football, men's and women's basketball, and ice hockey. That's the lion's share right there, and especially college football. It's a huge, huge source of revenue in so many college programs. It's to the point now a college can't afford not to have a decent football team because there's so much money at stake. And for better or worse, a lot of this money that comes through these football programs, it pays for all these other sports, all these other non-revenue sports, as well as some of the programs and services that universities operate independently of college sports. Some of the academic programs and some of these other services and some of these other programs that are there at colleges and universities are paid for through these revenue earning sports. So like you said, Russ, it is a business. It's been a business for a long, long time. And I think people always kind of tried to hide it and kind of frame it a different way, but let's just call it what it is. This is big business, and it has been for many, many years. Let's look at another one of these slides. And so let's look at how these NIL deals break down the revenue. And it's about a little less than 50-50. About 42% of these NIL revenues that we're seeing over the past year have been local brands, right? That could be a mom and pop business that, maybe a restaurant that hires some local athletes to come in, eat a few meals, and they post about it. Or they do a little endorsement deal, or they show up at, a grand opening, or that's about 42% of it. And then some of the franchise businesses as well. Like if somebody owns a local fast food restaurant, it's a big brand, but maybe it's owned by a local franchisee. That fits into the local brand category. And these are going to be generally the smaller NIL deals. And then you've got 58%. These are the national brands, okay? Like some of these, Gatorade just signed a pretty high-profile college basketball player to a big Gatorade NIL deal. And some of these other brands as well. So just kind of give you a snapshot at how they break down. 58% national brands, the big name corporations I think we're all familiar with, and then some of these local brands as well. We really want to think about some of these local brands because there's very much an opportunity for small business owners to get in on this, for better or worse, whether you're a fan of NIL or not, or you think it's the worst thing or the best thing to ever happen to college sports. If you have a small local business, and I'm thinking about folks in Cherokee, somebody that might own a restaurant, somebody that might have some kind of a new business. You look at some of these nearby universities, even Western Carolina, you could bring some athletes in from WCU, have them there at your grand opening, or give them a couple of free meals, and they can post about how great your restaurant is. Not going to cost you a whole lot, and it could be some decent advertising for you.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. That national brands at 58% is a little bit bigger than I expected. I thought the local brands would be a little closer to 50%, not over.
Yeah. And I think the reason why is because what you have with those is some of the big NIL deals are going through the national brands. So my guess is there's probably a lot more deals that are local. It's just they're not the big deals that are going to weigh the revenue breakdown in the direction of the national. I think that's probably what's going on. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take a look at another one of these slides, Russ. And so this is, according to Influencer, as of January this year, the average size NIL deal was just $1,100. $1,100. So not 500,000 or 600,000, which this is a nice sum of money for a young college athlete, but it's not this huge amount of money that I think we're seeing or we're thinking of so often associated with NIL at this point. And again, I really want to stress that the average college athlete is not going to walk away a millionaire from NIL. It's just not going to happen.
Wow.
Let's take a look at another one of these slides. Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say that is. I mean, when you think about the money that's flowing in there, that's a lot of small deals.
Yep. A lot of small deals, a lot of local businesses. And so how can athletes monetize, right? They can post on social media. They can use Instagram. They can use Twitter. They could do TikTok. They could do Facebook, whatever platform that they can post, and they have a following, and they can connect their brand with whatever business that they've got an NIL deal with and connect those with their followers. That is a potential revenue stream. Local, national endorsements. We also have team-wide payments, and this is something we're really seeing a lot in football. And I'm going to talk more about how those team-wide payments work, but essentially it's just a way for a collective to step in and distribute payments to each player on the team. And depending on the team, depending on how much money the collective has, depending on how high profile the team is, in some cases, you're looking at a whole team of college football players that could get maybe $25,000 or $30,000 a year across the board, all the players for being on that team. So it's almost like getting a salary for being on the team. And
Man,
then lessons, clinics, and camps.
Feel
that's
great.
What's that again, Russ?
I said it's got to make your backup punter feel great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Again, if you're some one of these people that just, you're not going to go pro, you're not going to be a superstar, that is a really good, a nice opportunity to get a head start on your finances in life. The lessons, clinics, and camp. The athletes have always, pretty much college athletes have been able to do lessons, clinics, and camps. But the caveat is that they could not associate their position within a university and a team. They couldn't tie that in. They couldn't advertise that. It had to be independent of their team role and that team brand. And now they can just go ahead and connect that. They can say, hey, I am, like I'm a big college wrestling fan. And I can say, or an athlete could say, look, I'm a starting wrestler for the University of Iowa, and I'm participating in this camp, or I'm going to host this clinic as an Iowa Hawkeye. And they can use that Iowa brand, which is a valuable brand if they're at one of these high-profile programs. They can use that to monetize NIL. So it's a little bit different than the way it was in the past, and it's just another opportunity, a way for athletes to expand all these different income streams. And some of these athletes are just working just different angles of this. They're doing some social media. Maybe they've got a team-wide payment coming in. Maybe they do a camp or something like that. And just you're hearing about all kinds of just interesting ways that athletes are getting money in the different types of brands, restaurants and soft drink companies, video games. Pretty much the sky's the limit. If they've got a market and they feel that they can use a college athlete to tap into that market and expand whatever it is they're selling, then there's a potential there for an NIL deal. Let's look at the next slide, Russ. Okay, so let's take a look here. This is on3nil.com, and this is one of these new companies that has emerged in recent years or just within the last year. And they've got every athlete. You can look them up and you can see where they're at in terms of NIL. So right here, this is just a random page off of this website, and it shows 4 different athletes. The guy on the top, he's a college football player at Notre Dame, and it says his deal is undisclosed. You've got a couple of basketball players. So again, it shows that his net value, NIL value of this kid, Michael Moyer, and he's a tight end at Notre Dame. His NIL value is just shy of $850,000. Wow. I'm not sure what that company is. You've got another kid here, St. Francis Table Soup Kitchen. His deal's only worth about $8,600. Okay, Jalen Moore. And he's at a small college there in Alabama. Miles Kelly, $13,000, a little more than $13,000. And then you've got a kid from Florida with $41,000. So again, I mean, this is a business, and they've got these It's not just okay, where'd they go to high school, and how many yards did they pass for, or how many 3-pointers did they score? No, it's like this is a whole new angle to college sports and what these kids are potentially worth. And it's crazy. I mean, just the thought of it. I mean, think of 5 years ago, this would have just, people would have just freaked out. I mean, this would have all been just beyond illegal. Colleges would have been put on suspension for years, for decades, for even approaching anything like this. And athletes would have lost their amateur status and their eligibility. And now here it is. It's a business. Let's look at the next slide. And this is another one from 1-3 NIL. And this shows a high school. This is Arch Manning. So, the Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, that family legacy going back to their dad, Arch Manning, the great quarterback from the Saints. So the latest Manning coming up is Arch Jr. And he is a rising senior at a school down in New Orleans. And he's considered like the biggest college prospect, the biggest potential football superstar in many, many years. And he hasn't even graduated yet. He's just a rising senior, just now getting started on his senior year. And they estimate his earning potential at almost $3.5 million through NIL. Boy. And in some ways, there are 28 states that have created legislation in some way, shape, or form to regulate NIL. And in those states, there are some benchmarks. There are some basic guidelines set in place. North Carolina is one of them. And in the other states, it's pretty much just, there are no laws in place. There are no regulations. And it's pretty much just whatever the athlete can manage to kind of come away with. And in some states, they've got regulations for high school athletes as well. And in other states, they don't. And this Arch Manning, I mean, he's an interesting individual. His parents really manage his career well. He doesn't share a lot of information through social media, doesn't share a lot of information publicly. We don't really know a lot about what his long-term goals are or what he's really trying to accomplish with NIL. It shows here he's got 170,000 followers. His per post value is $22,000. So just with those followers and his brand, his image, his reputation, he could potentially generate $22,000 for one post. That's big money.
I have got to step up my Instagram game.
I know, I do too. It's just crazy. Let's take a look at another one of these slides. And so these are collectives, right? This is just some different collectives that are out there. Here's one from South Carolina, TCU, Tennessee. And Tennessee has several of these collectives. And some are geared more towards football. Some are geared more towards basketball. Some of them have kind of a little different approach for how they're going to generate funding or how they're going to help broker these deals. But again, every major university that's involved in college sports in any way, you pretty much have to have a collective now. And it's created a lot of drama. Earlier this year, there was a back and forth between Nick Saban of Alabama and the head coach of Texas A&M. And Nick Saban accused him. It was the first year that in a long time that Alabama didn't get the top recruiting class in football. And this guy from Texas A&M got a bunch of these prize recruits. And Nick Saban accused him of buying every one of those recruits through some shady collective and NIL practices. And that other coach accused Nick Saban of being a narcissist. And, come on, you've been king of the hill for so long, and there's skeletons in your closet. You don't want to go there. And almost kind of like some WWF stuff going on between these coaches and these collectives. And, these guys like Nick Saban, they're worried. They've had their thumb on college sports for a long time, and they've controlled the pipeline for how these athletes are coming into schools. And now that's being disrupted. And again, who knows? I mean, I think Alabama is still going to be the top tier team. You still got to have a good coach. You still got to have the facilities. It's not enough just to pay kids a bunch of money. You got to think of other ways to motivate athletes. And we'll see this next year. It'll be really interesting to see how the teams perform, and if we see some new teams to arrive, and we can attribute a lot of their success to NIL. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Let's look at another slide here. I think I've just got a couple more of these. And so this is an interesting, I'm an old Michigan fan, and they're another one of these teams that had, a fallen angel, right? Back in the 70s and the 80s, the old Bo Schembechler teams. Michigan was always a top team, always going to the Rose Bowl. And then in recent years, they really struggled. They've gone through a myriad of coaches. They brought in Jim Harbaugh, the former NFL coach, who was a quarterback at Michigan back during the Bo Schembechler era. And everybody thought he was to be the person to restore them to their glory days. And this last season, he finally did really perform well, and the team really performed well. They made it. They beat Ohio State. They won the Big Ten. They had a great season. But before that, people were really worried about Michigan's team. And Michigan is one of these old school programs that has really been hesitant about NIL. And they've always kind of tried to go more traditional and stress the student athlete role, but they have finally come on board. They've got this collective, and this is an interesting collective because they're using that whole non-fungible token that we're hearing about with the whole cryptocurrency and the digital age of assets. So they're figuring out a way to use blockchain technology to create these NFTs, which will give people access to this collective. So it's just, I don't know how any of this is going to work. It almost sounds like pseudoscience, a little hokey, but just to give you an idea of where college sports is right now, what these teams are doing, what these funding sources and collectives are thinking, and how they're trying to tap into these opportunities. It's something that's really interesting, also scary in many ways, and something really, even if you're not a college athlete, even if you're a college student, you really need to be thinking about these things. If you're a student and what's really going on at the athletic program and the college that you're at, because in some way, shape, or form, even if you're not a college athlete or you're not really a sports fan, but you're at one of these universities, this is going to impact you in some way, shape, or form going down the road.
No kidding.
Russ, who's your college team?
Oh, I'm a Tar Heel. I'm a Tar Heel born. My brother actually graduated from there. I graduated from Appalachian State University, so I'm a Mountaineer. Later, I paid my own way through Western Carolina University so I could sit on either side of the field. But I'm still a Mountaineer. But yeah, I mean, if you live in North Carolina, you could graduate from one school and you could root for that school, but you do have to pick a side. I mean, it's a Carolina thing. You even people who've never been to college, you have to pick. Is it going to be Carolina or Duke? Yeah, we've got some Wolfpack fans out there who are diehard and they want to classify themselves in that same category. But really, you got to come down on one side or the other. It's the dark blue or the sky blue. And so, yeah, I bleed sky blue like all good Carolinians.
Well, I remember when I first came to Cherokee, I was always surprised because, I would say the majority of folks in Cherokee are either Tar Heel or Duke fans, but you've got a pretty good following for Tennessee, right? You got a lot of volunteer people
out of Asheville. You've got a lot of those orange tees on the power tees on the back of the pickup trucks. See them everywhere.
Well, Russ, I'm looking online here quickly. So it does look like App State has a collective, the Mountaineer Collective, a community of passionate fans, alumni, and App State supporters who are committed to supporting and empowering App State student athletes both on and off the field. So if you've got an overwhelming desire to support your alma mater's great football team, Russ, you've got the vehicle to do it.
No matter where I have lived, somehow the alumni office always finds a way to track me down. They always send me requests for money. So I'm sure at some point the collective will track me down as well.
They got a way of doing that. They sure got a way of doing that. This is kind of an old chart here, but it shows grossing athletic departments. And this was back pre-COVID, so this would have been 2019. And no big surprises here. I think we're all familiar. These are all schools that have big, high-profile football teams, LSU, Florida, these SEC schools, Alabama, Georgia, SEC teams, some of the Big Ten teams, Michigan, Ohio State. And then you got the Texas schools, which in recent years have not performed as well as they used to. But these are strong brands that have been around for decades, and they have huge followings, and they generate a lot of money, north of $200 million in some cases. So that's serious money.
No kidding.
Let's take a look at the next slide here. And so let's think a little bit more about the key takeaways here. Okay, let's wrap this up here. We're going on almost 45 minutes, I think. And so we have this definite Wild West scenario, right? We do not have regulation. I think that's really what people are looking for. At some point, the feds are going to step in and say, look, there needs to be some kind of regulation. They're going to create some more specific guidelines on rules in terms of how these NIL deals can work, what's an appropriate NIL deal is, what isn't. And we're going to see that all pan out here in the next few years. I'm sure they're going to get involved, and for better or worse, it's going to continue to change and influence how this whole NIL era evolves. The NCAA has definitely been weakened. It doesn't have the power it once did. It doesn't have the stronghold, that lock hold on so many of these athletes and how these sports are facilitated. And that's going to be interesting going forward. And again, colleges and universities, they're going to be forced to adapt in terms of how they recruit these athletes, what kind of athletes come into these programs, how these programs are managed. The bottom line is it's not just enough anymore to have a great team and have a great brand and have a great program. You've got to convince athletes that they can come to your university because they can be compensated to do so. And some of these athletes, they're playing really shrewd. They're wheeling and dealing. And there was a kid over there at a basketball player at Miami who apparently he issued an ultimatum to the Miami program and said, look, you guys get me a better NIL deal than what I have now, or I'm going to leave your school. I'm not going to come play for you. And they acquiesced. They worked with him. They figured out a way for him to get that NIL deal he wanted. So, for better or worse, whether you think that's a good thing that these athletes are becoming empowered or not, it's definitely changing the landscape in terms of what kind of bargaining power they have. And I also think this is interesting, but will college sports compete with pro leagues? And I think that that's something that could very definitely happen, especially with football. You could have really essentially an alternative to the NFL. You could have some athletes that choose to stay playing college football because they can get paid NIL. They're maybe not good enough to play in the NFL, but they're good enough to play in college, and they can get paid to play in college, and they're going to stay in college longer to get compensated. Or athletes that could go to the pros, but they're not going to be stars. But if they stay at the college level, they could be stars. So you could potentially have a situation where college sports generates a lot more money. You get better talent on the fields, and kids stay with playing college, especially basketball too. You see a lot of kids leaving college to go play in the NBA. Now you have a lot of kids that don't even go to college, and they go straight into these. They'll play a couple of years with these developmental teams, and then they'll become eligible for the NBA draft, and they'll go to the NBA. So maybe we'll see a situation where some of these athletes, some of these high-level athletes are staying in college, or they're choosing to go to college, where in the last few years they haven't been going to college. And that could create this pro league type of atmosphere in college sports, and it could be a good thing overall in terms of just keeping athletes in college. And maybe they go to school, maybe they don't go to school. I don't know, but at least it could help build some of these brands in college sports. And that's the other thing we need to think about too, is where these college athletes, what they're really going to do and what their purpose is for being in school. And that's all going to become and we're already seeing it. I mean, it's more and more clear, like what the motivations are for school. And for, again, these top tier athletes, it's all about getting to the next level and getting paid. And then for some of these other athletes that aren't in revenue sports, they have opportunities now to make a little bit of money, and they work really hard. They work just as hard as these high profile athletes in these big name sports. And this is a game changer for those kids as well. And of course, just unlimited opportunities for advertising and branding for all kinds of businesses, big businesses, small businesses, mom and pops, corporate businesses. And I really encourage anybody in Cherokee or in the community that has a small business. There's so many really strong little businesses in Cherokee, and there's a huge tourism industry there. And I think there could be some really good NIL opportunities for anybody looking to work with some of these college athletes, local athletes. We already mentioned there's a big following for the Tar Heels, big following for Duke, big following for Tennessee, and Western. Again, that's a local school, and they've got some good athletes there, and a lot of fans, a lot of people from the boundary go to school at Western. So there's opportunities there in a lot of different formats for any small businesses, and I really hope folks look at some of those opportunities and think about what they can do to work within this new NIL landscape to build their brands.
So you've been an athlete. I'm going to ask you two questions. I'm going to ask you to put on two different hats for us here. One is, if you're a college athlete and you've got some potential to participate in this, what are you going to be focusing on? I mean, obviously, when the rubber meets the road and you're on the court, when you're on the field, when you're there to support your team, the last thing you're thinking about is, what is my revenue potential? You're thinking about, I got to block this guy, or I got to score this point, I got to do this, I got to make the assist, whatever it is. You've got other things on your mind, but in general, what are you thinking about as you try to weave this into your life, which is only a year old at this point?
I know. Yeah. It's interesting. I think a lot of these kids, I think they're very cognizant of what their value is, right? And you saw these websites that spell it out. They know what their value is. And I think for an athlete that has huge potential, like these 5-star recruits going to these big football programs, I think they're looking to basically get a head start on their pro career. And they're thinking, look, I could come out of college a millionaire. I could make a huge amount of money. And they're having to balance that, though, because maybe they got a great NIL deal for a school, but that school might not be the best fit to get them to the NFL. Like, what's their end goal? Is it to make as much money as possible through NIL in college, or is it to do pretty well in NIL, but then get to that next level and become an NFL superstar or an NBA superstar? So I would think that would be a difficult conversation. And they've got representation. They've got people through collectives that they can work with that can kind of help them come up with that strategy for how to get to that next level, because just because there's the NIL dollars are right doesn't necessarily mean the program's the right fit if they want to really take their sport as far as they can. And then you've got some of these other athletes in maybe non-revenue sports or just less known revenue sport athletes, like second string or third string football players and basketball players. And they're probably just grateful for this opportunity in general. And I would hope that they're still in some way thinking about the college that they're going to and the value of that education. And hopefully there's still a way to maybe balance being a student with being a college athlete and still getting some NIL revenue in the process and figuring out what the best fit is. And maybe they can make a little bit of money now and they can use that to get a head start on their finances, because they're never going to be pro athletes, or at least they're not going to be big money generating pro athletes. And they can use this as an opportunity to build a little bit of a nest egg while still going to school and getting a degree. And that's the majority of them, right? And that's what they're thinking about.
Sure.
And how they manage that. We're seeing a lot of athletes transferring. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because that whole door is open now too. The you've got all of these transfer opportunities, and if I realize that I'm being undervalued at one school and I could make more and do more, maybe I'm thinking about transferring. If you're a small business owner, let's say you own a small business here in Cherokee, and you're kind of right on the fence here between Tennessee, and you got Carolina and Duke, and you're north of the Bulldog territory and south of Virginia Tech. You got a lot of these big schools in the neighborhood. What are you going to be thinking about in terms of how this could help your small business? If you were a small business owner, what's the first step you're going to take to make this work for you?
Well, I think the first step would be to reach out to some of these different schools and connect with athletes. I think you probably want to connect with these collectives. And again, go to that website that I just shared, look at those collectives, look them up online, contact them. And I would explain, look, I am a local business owner. I'm in Western North Carolina, and this is our business. And we're looking to build our brand through an NIL relationship with a college athlete. What can you folks offer us? What can you folks present? Because that's part of these collectives' job, is to help these athletes navigate and set up these NIL deals. So I think the place to go, for better or worse, would probably be to start with a collective, and then try and gain that relationship through there, and just see what the different opportunities are. Obviously, yeah, in Cherokee, you've got a mixed basket of sports fans, and you've got these different schools. But I think ultimately, people just get excited with athletes and with even minor celebrities. And I think even the biggest Duke fan in the world would still be pretty excited if some Tar Heels were in Cherokee for some kind of a promotion or something like that. And that could be a way to build up. And also just think about the budget and how much you're willing to invest into this. If it's meals, if it's some other type of compensation, what you can afford to invest in that to support these athletes. And then you're also going to really want to keep an eye on it and make sure. That's one thing that I would be concerned about. It's not like a standard type of endorsement deal where you hire somebody and they come in necessarily and you pay them through an agent. If you're compensating somebody and the agreement is that they're going to post on social media, you need somebody that's going to keep track and make sure that they are posting consistently and the posts are favorable, and also keep an eye on these kids, because this is one risky area. You don't know what else this person might be putting on their social media. What if there's something that's negative, or especially now with so much concern over people saying an athlete that makes an inflammatory post or a degrading post towards certain aspects of our society or something like that. So that you definitely would need to keep an eye on that and pay attention. It's not just, okay, here you go, make some posts and we'll take your word for it that they're going to be great posts and that you've got a great reputation and you're not going to tarnish that in any way. Because ultimately, if a kid, an athlete, male or female, makes some bad decisions, and of course we all know that college athletes are not immune from making bad decisions. Some of them get in trouble with the law.
I've never known a college student to make bad decisions. Isn't that what college is for?
I know. As long as there's not no charges, I guess. Once the law gets involved, it gets a little. There's that kid from really good wrestler from Oklahoma State, won the national championship as a freshman, and he just got nailed. He got nailed with sexual assault charges, and then just 2 weeks later, he got nailed with a robbery charge. And I don't know how any of this is going to pan out, but boy, that's just that's an NIL nightmare right there. That Oklahoma State kicked him off the team. He's no longer an Oklahoma State Cowboy, and he's facing serious charges. And you wouldn't want to have any part of that if you were a brand. In fact, he had a brand. He had a clothing line, and they dumped it.
Yeah, we've seen some shoe brands go south with the Major League Baseball player this week, and they've decided they're going to cut ties because of things that are happening and things that are being said. And you brought up the law, and I want to make this final point here, I guess, before we do go. And the laws around social media posts and promoted posts, that's not under state jurisdiction. That is a federal thing, and you've got the consumer protection bureaus out there, and you've got the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, FCC, Federal Communications Commission, that regulate these things. And I could see a situation where you've got somebody who has not really been shown how to do this, making a promoted post, putting it out there, and then getting in trouble with federal regulators, and getting not themselves in trouble, but get the brand in trouble. Kim Kardashian was paid millions of dollars to post one Instagram post about this thing some people may have heard of called the Fire Festival, that everybody got excited about and it didn't turn out too well. Watch some of those documentaries. That'll burn your biscuits. And so she put out this post, but people didn't realize that they were paying her to say this stuff. So that really brought a lot of heat on them. So yeah, I mean, if you're an athlete, and I would really hope that in addition to some of the financial literacy training that U.S. Bank and Open Doors and some of these others are going to be doing for these athletes, that they'll help them understand you can't just go out there and say, eat at Russ's hot dog stand because it's the best hot dogs in the world. If Russ is paying you to say that, you've got to let the world know that Russ told you to say that. I would
That's
love
a really
it
good
if
point.
I would love to just eat the hot dogs and say nice things about me, but you want to have some control. That's kind of the point of this, right?
Yeah, there is. And it just really speaks to just how gray that area of advertisement has become in recent years. It's so hard to tell now what is a commercial, what is an ad. And you see it, like product placement in movies and television shows, right? They've always got a brand like in these scenes and things like that. And you're right with the posting, like being clear, this is an ad, it's not an ad, and what they can say and what they can't say. But again, it's still the Wild West. And until we have some more clear guidelines in terms of what works and what doesn't, we're going to see more of this going forward.
Well, it's going to be exciting to watch. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the athletes themselves react to this. Again, I would love to see the schools jump in on the education side and be a little more supportive of these students. And so, yeah, we'll see over the next year or two what happens. Wild West, here we come. Shawn, I've appreciated having you on here. Thank you for all the work you do on these and all the information you bring to this. And I appreciate all the good things that Dr. Percap brings to Indian country, and your knowledge is greatly appreciated.
Well, you bet, Russ, and I always appreciate working with you and Sequoia Fund. You folks do great work, and you're a real asset and an attribute for Indian country for sure.
Well, thank you. And for those of you who joined us this evening, or those of you who may be watching later at a later time, we thank you for hanging in there with us and learning about this. Keep an eye on those athletes when you're watching your favorite athletes on the field, on the court, on the mat, wherever it is. You may be thinking in terms of not just their performance, but maybe their financial performance as well. That's something to keep an eye on. Go keep up with their stats. I can see in the future our trading cards are not just going to have batting averages and on-base percentages and things like that. We're going to have their NIL scores and their values, and it's maybe somebody from Topps or one of the other card companies will be watching this and they'll say, hey, maybe we should get in on that. But yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Shawn, until next time, my friend, take care. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. I'm Russ Siegel for Sequoia Fund. Good night.